Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Average Joe Let's Talk About It. You ever wake up and feel like you're behind? Get that anxiety as you're laying in bed, trying to figure out all the things that you have to do, or at least you believe that you have to do? Well, you're not alone. It's not like we have it all figured out. And they tell you when you get older, you'll figure it out someday. Well, that's not true. I'm 50 years old. I ain't got it figured out. But you know what? I don't have that kind of pressure on myself to have it all figured out. Because what I realized, or at least what I figured out, was that you may never have it all figured out, and that's okay. So today, we're going to be talking about the pressure to have it all figured out and why that's a trap. Again, welcome to the episode. Welcome to the channel. Welcome to the show. And if you're here for the first time, I hope it won't be the last. So let's get into it. So at some point, we all wake up and realize nobody handed us the manual. The manual? The manual for what? For life? Come on. We all know better than that. I know better than that. It's weird how we kind of judge each other based on how well we're doing or how much we do have figured out. Right? There's a quiet belief that by a certain age you're supposed to feel settled, and somehow most of us just don't. And once again, and I will say this throughout the entire podcast, it's okay to feel these ways about these things because we're human. And if it always feels like you got some catching up to do, well, again, not alone. So most people aren't lost. They just comparing their behind the scenes to somebody else's highlight reel. I kind of touched on that in the last episode, and it is true. It goes without saying that a lot of our highlights are shown in social media and places in the public where others can see, but what they don't see is our lowlights, and we have just as many of those as we do highlights. And I know I've heard myself say this before. There are great times in your lives that you should be proud of, that you should share with others. But just know that those highlights didn't come without a little bit of pain or some struggle or whatever, right? I mean, it takes work to be happy in the way that you feel that you want to be happy. And that may be something that we'll touch on later. I don't think that we should be putting pressure on ourselves to feel any sort of way based on what we see around us. Your internal struggle about being happy and what satisfies you is yours and yours alone. It shouldn't be influenced by outside factors. And I know that's easier to say than it is to get over, but if you keep that in the back of your mind as much as possible, in every given situation, in both the negative and the positive aspects of your life, you'll hopefully get to a point where you can be accepting that, the negative feelings that you have, they're going to come, they're going to go, they're not going to last. You're going to move on to the next thing. And in between are those happy moments. For those of you out there that are happy all the time, God bless you. Because it is work and you must be working hard. So, but keep it up if you are. I mean, I'd like to say that I'm 100% positive 100% of the time. And, I've always got a smile on my face and I'm chuckling with everyone. And, I take all the stuff that comes at me, regardless if it's serious or not, lightly. But somehow I always find a way to twist things up, and that finds its way into my gut, and for a lack of better term, it gets me salty sometimes. So, but we've all been there. So kind of move on from that. So where's the pressure coming from is the question, I guess. Externalizing pressure makes it feel kind of less personal, I guess, if it's coming from those we love or whatever, I mean, you're getting inputs from all over the place, probably the phone in your hand, right? That is where the majority of our pressures come from. You wake up in the morning, one of the first things you do is you reach for your phone. And if you don't, I applaud you. But that's a tough thing, ever since the inception of the cell phone at the point where it's at now, where you can do everything with it. It's got us trapped in that situation where, the cycle begins first thing in the morning and doesn't end until, the moment you put it down at night to go back to sleep. So, and it's up to you to choose which of those parts you decide to keep with you and to live rent free in your head, and which ones you deposit in your, your proverbial trash bin, so to speak, or, however you push that stuff aside, right? We think about, timelines, our culture, and they're not natural. Milestones that are marketed, right? There's a lot of influence out there, so let's take milestones being marketed, right? So, we're talking about the pressures that are external that say you have to have it figured out by a certain age, which is obviously a misconception. But we base a lot of that on opinion of others and what we see, whether it be in social media, on the internet, on the television, or maybe how your upbringing was, your cultural background, parents, relatives, folks like that, who I think, used to be the biggest input in your life and would make the biggest impact on your decisions, probably don't have that much power over you as much as the internet does. And so we expect things in our lives to be happening by a certain time based on those timelines that are marketed out there for particular milestones that we should be achieving at a certain age, which it's getting harder and harder. I could go off on a tangent, and I think about all these things, but I got to stay directed, right? So, we can talk about, those milestones and how they've changed over time based on technology, economic decline, or, whatever the case may be, right? But talking about social media and the external pressures and where they come from, they compress life into those snapshots, and you might be able to see a portion of somebody's life or what they believe has got them in a place where they feel satisfied, but that's all we see. We don't get to see the behind the scenes. We don't get to see how they're feeling when they're, feverishly, typing into the keyboard on their phone, whether or not they're masking something that's, negatively impacting them. And this is their outlet. This is their outlet to make them feel better. And the stuff that they show you is probably all fine and good, and it is happening. But you never know what's happening behind closed doors. That's why when you talk about, you see all these people saying, hey, you don't know what someone's going through because you're not them. So always be kind to everyone. And wouldn't that be great if the world all respected that ideal, right? But it's the truth, right? Everybody's going through something. So, measuring yourself with a ruler that wasn't built for, real life situations isn't helpful to you. It's not going to bring you out of the rut that you feel like you're in, right? You have to be empowered by yourself. You give yourself that power. Don't let people take that away from you. understand that you own it, right? So if you're in the place where it's dark and you're struggling and you don't think there's an end in sight, obviously human nature, right, dictates the fact that we are all social individuals, whether it's on the internet or in person. But reach out if you're there. Nothing should take you to a place that's so bad that you're thinking about more permanent alternatives. 100%. I'm all about making sure that somebody's giving you some recommendations and some advice instead of doing the other. We talk about there's something. Hey, I'd rather have you call me up at 1:00 in the morning and talk to me about nothing, or what I would hope that turns into nothing, than be eulogizing you, right? So that's a real thing, and it's something that we deal with because of these pressures. But always find an outlet for it. Figure out what that is. It might not even be talking to people. Just talk to yourself. You ain't crazy. I'm talking to myself right now. It just so happens that later on somebody's listening to it. And if you're listening to it, God bless you, man. Because now I'm not really talking to myself. Or am I? In any case, let's get back to it. The timelines we feel behind us, or I'm sorry, the timeline we feel behind on was usually designed by someone selling something to us that made it sound like we should be somewhere. Those markers in our lives, you're supposed to have a job and be out of your parents' house by 18, or maybe even have a job before that, right? Your first car, or your be married by mid-20s, have a career at the same time, making your mom and dad grandparents for the first time by a certain age, owning your own house. There are so many steps in the process, but there isn't really any solid, like a permanence of when those things are supposed to happen. But the pressure's there to try to force us into a box that makes us think that they need to happen at a certain time. And while it's helpful, it motivates us, the pressure's still there. And, it's all about how we're going to deal with that pressure. And, we're going to push something aside, understand what our priorities are, list them out, have your goals set, and say, hey, maybe I need to push this priority that everybody thinks that I need to have happen now to the back, so I can take care of this other thing that makes more sense for me. And that's okay, right? So at the end, feeling behind usually means you're measuring your life with someone else's expectations. So start thinking about your own. So what's the hidden cost of having it together? People who look figured out are often just better at presentation, right? So the facade that we show everybody else isn't necessarily what's really going on behind the scenes. And stability isn't the same as certainty, because when it comes to anything, really, how certain are you of something? I guess that has to do with your confidence. But when it all boils down to it, the nuts and bolts are, everyone is improvising more than we think. And so we are doing all this comparison really for nothing. My recommendation is you compare your current self to your former self. And if you are making progress, then you are doing well. So congrats. So looking put together is a skill for sure. And being at peace, though, with that is something you take on, right? It's a different skill altogether. Most of the confidence that someone has is borrowed. And what I mean by borrowed is, we try to be as confident about something as we can, unless we're talking about facts, right? But we're talking about our lives, right? We're not talking about, how adamant you are about a certain belief and whether or not you believe it's fact or opinion. We're talking about how you deal with your life and how you present yourself. So you're out there, you're exuding that confidence, and you are in a place where you feel satisfied with your outward appearance to everybody else. But, until you've proven to yourself that confidence is real by acting on it and doing the things that, that fulfill your expectations, not anybody else's, then that's what matters. And that's what the focus should be on. Looking like you have it figured out and actually having peace are definitely two different things. I'd rather look a mess, but be at peace. Because I know that that's a factor of being happy with yourself and where you're at, regardless of external expectations. And I don't want to say that, what people think of you doesn't matter, but you have to pick and choose when it matters, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be all the time. You don't have to be putting out this face that's, happy-go-lucky, or you've got things going on that you're proud of. Those things you can internalize. And if you're disheveled and you look like you just ain't getting along very well in life, even though you feel that you are, that's okay too. But I definitely hope that you are, regardless of how you look, regardless of what that exterior facade is presenting to others. So I want to talk about reframing what behind means. You've heard me say that a couple times, being behind, welcome to the party, you're early, or, you wake up feeling behind and it makes you anxious, right? But it's not necessarily that meaning. Being behind might mean you're just choosing differently. When you're laying in bed and you haven't even put your foot down on the floor of the bedroom to get up and start moving, your brain is firing on all cylinders. I know mine is. And the quicker that I get out of that bed and I start executing the day, the happier I am. And the longer that I just sit there and I think about what I need to do makes it so much worse. So it's one thing that I've been identified in myself, and it may be something that you struggle with too. For once, I'd like to lay in bed and not have anything to think about, but unfortunately, that's not how we're wired. It's not how anybody's wired. And if you are wired that way, please send me the recipe to the secret sauce. Also, you're allowed to be early in your own life. So, you want to feel like, you got to hurry up and get somewhere, or be somewhere, or be with someone, or get something done. All of that is what you believe needs to happen. And of course, not every path is linear. I'll tell you what, some of us with, OCD, ADHD, ADD, all of the acronyms that everybody has. I'll tell you what, I just call it scatterbrain, because I'll start one task and then I'll be walking on my way to it and I'll find something else to do. But I do it though, and things get done. They just, not every path is linear. you might branch off, and you may not even get to the thing that you're trying to get to from, point A to point B, because you decided to go to Z backwards. But things are getting done, right? Pat yourself on the back for the stuff that you are accomplishing, even though your primary purpose was just distraction. Because distraction is the biggest nemesis for tasking, for sure. So when we talk about being behind, who are we comparing ourselves to? Who has made this assumption or this idea that you are behind if you aren't at this point in your life? Different timing doesn't necessarily mean wrong timing. Like I said in earlier on, if you go to this structured idea of in what order you think things need to happen in your life to be successful, right? The list, right? The laundry list, job, out of the house, your own place, married, kids, career, all of these things, right? It's all this abstract garbage that floats in your head that, to be honest, right, it goes back to being happy. What are those things like that I've mentioned in that list, truly make you happy? And then when? Because what if you show up too early to one of those milestones and you're not happy? You're just forced into a decision based on an external pressure, and now you're not happy. So really, the question is do you let things around you externally force you into making decisions based on the pressure and your culture, your upbringing, and the ideals where certain things have to happen at a certain time in your life? Or can you be happy with it organically happening in your life when it chooses to, and go from there? I guess it would depend on whether or not you believed in the power of free will versus fate, and then structure. And I'll tell you what, when it comes to structure, I don't know what it is to not be on a schedule, even as a kid, but most of the jobs that I have, schedule. And I was in the military for 24 years. So, structure and having a schedule and living by every tick on the second hand is the most insane thing that we could be doing to ourselves. But we do it. I think we kind of tolerate that part of our lives. So what are you going to be a slave to? The clock, pressures, external inputs? It's up to you. Right? What's going to make you happier? Pick and choose those things. And understand none of them, except the ones that you are at peace with, will probably make you happy. So you got to do a practical shift, right? Replace the question, am I behind, to am I moving in a direction I can live with? And to me, pretty much sums it up. I swear to God, I wish that I would have had these things in my mind as I was getting older, and I'm halfway through, I'm in midlife right now, and I'm thinking to myself, am I good? I'm constantly judging myself and wondering if the place that I'm at now is the place that I need to be. And it's the wrong way to think about it. It shouldn't be, hey, do I need to be here? Or ask yourself, how do I feel about where I am? Right? And omit all of that external pressure and all those negative inputs that make you feel like you're not doing enough. Because if you're at peace, and if you're at a point in your life where you feel happy and you're not thinking about what everybody else is thinking, saying, or judging you about, I think you'll find it a kind of a burden shift or a weight lifted off of your shoulders type of situation, but wake up from that nightmare that is, hey, you got to be here for a certain reason at a certain point in your life, because that doesn't exist. And you say, time is a construct. How we feel about where we are at a certain point in our lives is everything, but it shouldn't be based on that construct. So just understand that progress doesn't have to look impressive. It just needs to be real. And then peace is definitely a better metric than speed. And take it slow, take it easy. You don't need to get a whole bunch of stuff out of the way to be happy later on in life. And you don't need to rush to get to those points in order for your life to be better. Because speed, although it looks impressive, it's the direction that actually matters. So, to wrap it up, if you feel behind, it might not mean you failed. It might mean you're human. Yay! There's nothing wrong with still becoming. Right? We can't live in that space forever, right? But you definitely, lifelong learner, always wanting to better yourself. The only thing that you should compare yourself to is the person that you were yesterday, 10 years ago, your prior self, nothing else. There is nothing wrong with still becoming. So with that, I leave you, give you something to chew on for a little while. I think I'm going to chew on it as well. It's a little different, writing these things down as bullet points. And I'm not going to lie to you, ChatGPT is very helpful when it comes to providing some content. But although it gives me bullet points, it's a far cry from saying, hey, these are the recommended, responses and, the inflection that you should have when you're talking about this. All those things are natural from me. So when I say, hey, I'm using an AI to help me write a podcast, I guarantee you that 90% of the people out there are. I'm honest about it, but I do need help when it comes to understanding what I'm trying to convey to my listeners. And more importantly, what I'm trying to convey to myself, because like I said in the last episode, there's a catharsis here for me to be able to, openly give myself to strangers and say, hey, we're all dealing with the same thing, right? So give yourself room to breathe. Understand that we're all fighting the same fight. We're just in different parts of the world doing it. Have that new lens installed so you can see the world differently. And I'll take that advice as well. But just understand that the pressure's real, but it's misinterpreted. So just like in the last episode, it's all about perception and how you perceive that pressure. Turn it on its axis. Go, 90 degrees out and say, hey, you know what? I've got control. So thank you again for listening. This has been episode 2 of Average Joe. Let's talk about it. And I hope in the coming episodes, I get a chance to kind of share myself a little bit, my life and my experiences and where this is all coming from. I'm trying to get my son to come on to the show. He's similar in mindset. We were both military veterans. I retired. He was in for a small amount of time, but nonetheless, he still served. And our next episode is going to be the differences in generations versus, hey, how are things back then versus now? So if you're interested in that and you happen to be a military veteran, then you'll want to stay tuned for the next episode. Once again, these episodes come out once a week. I thank you for joining us today, and we'll talk next time. Be safe.